I have not been a particularly introspective person throughout my life. And so having these conversations with other people is so good for me because I can use it as a mirror and see what they're seeing and see what they went through. And then I can take it back and say, how do I relate to that? How do I feel about that? Is there anything in my life that was like that?
Hello, you are listening to the Late Bloomer Living podcast. I'm Yvonne Marchese, your host, and I'm so happy you're here. I created this podcast to give you inspiration and let you know you're not alone in feeling stuck in midlife. I also invite you to join the Age Agitators Club for women, where we come together monthly to hatch our plans for making waves as we age. Being part of this community for women will remind you on a regular basis that you're not too old, and it's never too late to do that thing you've been thinking about. You can find more information at latebloomerliving.com/community, and I hope to see you there. Hello, my friend. I firmly believe that reinvention is not about changing yourself. It's about changing the way you think about yourself. And it's so cool that today's guest had a personal experience that really lines up with that. In an email that I just got from her recently, she asks, have you ever heard the quote by Wayne Dyer? This is from her email. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at changed. She says, that's what happened to me during my 40 Drinks project. I started changing the way I looked at myself, and I ended up changing. Her name is Stephanie McLaughlin. She took on a personal project called the 40 Drinks Project in honor of her 40th birthday. And we are sitting down today to talk about what inspired her to do that and what she got out of doing that and how it is still affecting her life over 10 years later. So I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. So without further ado, here's Stephanie McLaughlin. Let's go. Stephanie, thank you so much for being with me today. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Yvonne. It's so great to be here.
Oh my gosh, it's awesome. So we're close to the same age. I'm 55, you're 52.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about why you decided to do the 40 Drinks Project to begin with, like a little more detail or anything I missed in that intro.
Yeah. So as I was coming up to 40, I was in a place in my life where I had broken up with or been broken up with by yet another terrible boyfriend. I think that one did it by text message. I mean, terrible. Yeah. And I was never engaged, never married, no kids. I had never had any of those particular milestones. And so the thought of throwing my own party for myself at age 40 felt so icky and gross to me at the time. And it's interesting because when I was 25, I threw myself a bash to end all bashes. And it was cute and sassy and, fabulous at that point in time. But 15 years later, it just didn't have the same vibe. And when you go to these big parties and you invite people from, across the swath of your life, you don't get to spend a lot of time with people, right? You get 5 minutes here or 3 minutes there or 10 minutes there. And, somebody I haven't seen in 5 or 10 years. It's like, so for a whole bunch of reasons, this party just felt like something I really didn't want to be a part of. It was gross. It was icky. And so the idea came to me almost fully formed. 40 drinks. I could have 40 drinks. I could have 40 drinks with 40 people. And then it just kept evolving. Well, what if it was in 40 different places? So I wasn't just going to the same bar over and over again. And then what if each drink had some thematic connection to my friend or our relationship, something between us?
Mm-hmm.
And that was like Oh my God, that sounds like so much fun.
That does
It
sound like fun. I agree.
Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
also absolutely ridiculous and outrageous, which is right up my alley. And I thought it was a great way to extend my birthday for as long as it took to have 40 drinks. And
I
so
love
that's why I
that.
did it.
I freaking love that because I got to tell you, I'm not a party person.
Mm,
And it's for all the reasons that you just said. Like, you do not get to spend quality time with anybody, with any
right,
one person at a
right.
party,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, it's a
Although
whirlwind.
I have gotten pretty good at latching on to a person at a party these days and
Right.
finding the most interesting person in the room
And that's a
at the
great thing
moment.
to do if you're attending somebody else's party, but if it's your
Yes.
party, right?
Right.
Right? And there was just an element of, and I'm sure this was in my own head, there was this element of like, is this like the wedding that I never got? You know what I mean? Where you
Mm.
get like 5 minutes and you're like, this person and then that person. I have to make sure I say hello to everyone. It was so icky.
It sounds like you were attaching a lot of I'm going to venture to say it sounds like you were attaching a lot of self-judgment to where
Mm,
you were in your life at that point.
yeah,
Did that play into it? Because if you weren't married and didn't have kids, I mean, society has this idea for us that we all go, okay, you grow up, you go to school, you get married, you have kids,
yeah.
and so on and so on and so on.
Hmm.
And really that is not super realistic anymore. And our our lifetimes are expanding, right? We're living
Hmm.
longer. And in general, people are getting married later and later.
Hmm.
And that, but we still have the idea, the old model in our
Yeah.
head of what our lives are supposed to look like, right?
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think, my parents got married real young,
Hmm.
real young. I mean, they were 20 or 21. And I have two younger brothers, and both of them had already been married and,
Yeah.
having kids. And it's so interesting and so relevant for this conversation because I really was a late bloomer when it came
Yeah.
around to, relationships. I mean, I had had plenty of them, but none that really fit or that I was content in or that I was really comfortable in. So yeah, I think you're right to venture that there was some self-judgment. There was, and I think there was also an element of being between the caterpillar and the butterfly stage too, of
Mm.
just sort of that, like, there was a lot of goo, there was a lot of ick, there was a lot of weird things going on in my life. Things weren't fitting as well as they had before. I was having obviously issues with romantic relationships. I was having issues with friend relationships. I was growing a new business. So yeah, there was a lot of just, not a lot of groundedness at that point in my life.
Yeah. One of the things that I love that you mentioned and maybe it was in our first conversation or it was something I read, which was this idea of, we've got midlife, which first of all is really, really hard to define
Yeah,
because how do you know when you don't know when you're going to die, so you don't know when the real middle is.
right.
And we are living longer and longer and longer, and we if we're lucky or if we've taken good care of ourselves, we're staying healthier for longer. And
Hmm.
so I think people's sense of identification with the phrase midlife has expanded.
Yeah.
And funny enough, when I've talked to people in their 40s, very often I think of 40s as midlife.
Hmm.
But I've talked recently to people who are in their 40s and they don't feel like they're in midlife.
And they
And I
don't
talked to,
resonate with the term.
no, and I
Yeah,
talked to a lot of people who are in their 60s who definitely feel like they're in midlife,
yeah,
right? So, and 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 then some people even in their 70s, they're like, "Well, I still feel like I'm in but I guess I'm officially not in midlife." And how do how
right.
do you identify? It's all about what you're telling yourself in your brain. I guess what I'm getting to is this idea that you've come up with that that mid 30s to 40s is like a hallway to a hallway
Yeah.
leading to midlife, I
Yeah.
think was the phrasing you used. And I thought that is so perfect. In fact, it's only in hindsight, I think probably about 50 is when I realized this, that when I was 35, indeed,
Yeah.
was the beginning of a massive shift in my values.
Hmm.
And it was that hallway to midlife for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things there that you pointed out that are really important. To go back to what you're talking about midlife, the other thing is our lives aren't quite as linear as they used to be,
Mm,
right? There used to be a very prescribed pathway, and you and I came of age when the pathway was still pretty prescribed, right?
mm-hmm.
We still came of age. We got out of college and you could still go to work for a company and at the time think that you'd probably retire from that company. That
Yeah.
kind of fell apart as we were in our 20s and into our 30s. So people coming up behind us don't have that same sense of there's a very clear pathway that you're quote unquote supposed to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the other piece of it is, and you nailed it with 35. One of the things that came out of the 40 Drinks project, and I'm sure we'll get to this, is in the end of the year that it took me to have the 40 drinks, I was a different person than I was at the beginning of the year.
Yes,
And
I
so
want to
much had
know about
happened.
that. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
But the interesting thing to me was as I got a little bit of distance from it on the other side, I could see, oh, my life changed. I changed. I am a different person. But when I became really curious about it and kept going back to it and digging into it, and I realized, and the research that I did, that this actually is a very common developmental stage in our adult lives. So there was a
Mm,
woman by the name of Gail Sheehy who wrote a book in the 70s, in the like mid 70s. And her thesis was from like conception to like age like 18, there are so many resources on developmental stages and what to expect, and from everything from teething to the sleep regression to adolescence to teenagehood,
milestones, right?
milestones and developmental
Milestones.
stages,
Yes.
right? Things
Uh-huh.
that as a parent, it's like, oh, the terrible twos, you kind of know what those are about. um but once we become a quote unquote adult, whether that's at 18 and we leave the house, or 22 and we've graduated college, it's like you're an adult, and adult means one thing from that point until you die. And
Right.
her
Which
contention
is
was
ridiculous, right?
ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Her contention was not true. And in fact, there are predictable developmental stages that we go through as adults. And so the one that I am most interested in is this decade 35 to 45, because it's when a lot of us transition from what she called first adulthood into second adulthood.
Mm,
And during first adulthood, um, you're really living your life according to somebody else's prescription. You're doing all the things that you should do, that you're supposed to do. And you're trusting all these external authorities to tell you what the right path is, what the right thing to do is, right? It's our parents, it's our teachers, our mentors, our bosses, whoever is older and wiser than us is telling us this is how you get to be happy, healthy, successful, and safe. And so we do those things, and we spend our 20s and we spend our 30s with our nose to the grindstone, checking all the boxes, doing all the things. But it's somewhere around that mid 30s age that we start to realize, we pick our heads up a little bit and kind of look at where we've gotten by following these paths. And we start to think about, wait a minute, I know that someone said that this was going to get me someplace that would make me happy, but I'm not happy. And now I have enough experience in the world. I have enough um, expertise in my own life and my own wants and my own thoughts and dreams that I can start trusting myself to make those decisions. And
Mm.
so that's exactly what you were talking about, right? This shift in sort of who we are and what we value and what we think about and how we want to spend our time and what our relationships are like. And that's the piece that people come to around 40. But you're 100% correct that the people who are turning 40 now, they don't resonate with the term midlife. They don't resonate with the term midlife crisis. So it's like, it's just not common cultural knowledge that we go through this stage. And I think lots of people out there are taken by surprise, like I was.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Oh, yeah.
and things can get messy.
It's exactly, this is so funny because it's exactly what I told this millennial that we were talking to today. I said, first of all, she's got a podcast that's about happiness,
Mhm.
right? And I'm talking to her and I told her, I am so excited to be here talking to you today because I imagine that because you're so much younger, perhaps your audience is also so much younger. And I have to tell you, this shift in my values and everything, it was like shifting sand under my feet. Like I didn't know what was happening at the time. And
Mhm.
it was like somebody came and just pulled the rug out from under me. Um, so interesting. And here's the thing. I didn't live the necessarily prescribed like do what society tells you thing because I got married too young, or I did it in a compressed way
Yep.
perhaps because I did up to a certain point. I got out of high school, went to college for theater. This is where things get funny. So I was a theater major, and all I wanted to do from the time I was 7 was be an actress. And I wanted to
Mm.
move to New York, and that was my big life goal.
Yeah.
Now, that wasn't ever prescribed by any adult to me.
Sure.
I will say that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that was what I wanted from way back. And I got married too young. I ended up recognizing that I still needed to go do this thing and it wasn't going to happen in this marriage. And ended up getting divorced before I was, by the time I was, 25, I
Yeah.
guess, and moved to New York to do it. I was living the dream.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now there are some similarities here in that I was doing everything I could to be a success as an actor on stage,
Right.
right? Um, and what happened was that I had kids late.
Mhm.
I didn't have my first child until I was 35.
Mhm.
And it was motherhood that was a sea change for me.
Mhm.
I think it was already starting to happen that I was becoming not disgruntled, but the glamour of the idea of being
Yeah.
an actress had long faded,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And I was living the reality of audition to audition and show to show and a gypsy life of an actor. And I realized I didn't want that
Yeah.
anymore. And it was a massive identity crisis
Mhm.
to give that up and not know what was next.
You just hit on two things that are so common among these stories. So one of them is the concept of having kids, right? So once you come to your mid 30s and sometimes you're 40 or early 40s, you realize there is a ticking here on the clock, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a you're either going to do it or not going to do it, and you're going to make that choice. And then the second part is the identity piece. Absolutely, that is something that people go through over and over and over again in these conversations I have. Who am I? Who am I if I'm not this? Who am I if I am this? Who am I if I
Yeah.
change careers? Who am I if I have kids or don't have kids? Who am I if my kids go to college? I mean, so this period of time, this 35 to 45, is when all of that starts hitting us, and we don't expect it. We don't know that it's coming.
No, you don't.
Yeah,
It's like a bat upside the head, isn't
it
it?
is. And like you said you were standing on shifting sand, and I just had this visual of like when you stand in the ocean just up to your
Yeah.
ankles and the waves come in and out and the sand moves below you, and like
Yeah.
you're off balance and you have to regain your footing. It's like Yes, that's it. That's the metaphor. That's
Exactly
35 to
the
45.
feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think now I think about, one of the reasons I named this the Late Bloomer Living podcast is I am totally a late bloomer. I was late to motherhood. I was late in so many ways and so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the term is not necessarily something that a lot of people relate to or want to cop to.
Yep.
A lot of people don't want to say they're late bloomers. But I do think that everybody is a late bloomer in some way, shape, or form in their life, in some aspect. And I especially feel like the people who really bought into following that prescription for their life, like and let's say they had massive career success, right?
Yeah.
And then still have it happen to them.
Yes.
Still have it happen. They've got the success, they've got all the trappings, everything looks great on paper, and still something is shifting under them. And it's why I don't buy into the concept of a midlife crisis at all, because I genuinely think it's a midlife awakening. I
Yeah.
think it's like there's something that bubbles up from within us. I'm sitting here like gesturing
Yeah.
up the center of my body, right? There's something that bubbles up within us that says, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of that song where, this is not my beautiful house. This is
Yes.
not my beautiful, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you go, how did I get here?
Yeah. I had a woman on my podcast who had achieved such amazing corporate success. And around 40, she was sitting in boardrooms and thinking to herself, is this it? Is this what I worked so hard for to get here? Aren't I supposed to be
Mm.
happier? Aren't I supposed to feel something different? And it's so interesting. You see lots of career changing in this period of time. There's almost a cliche of, the woman who gives up the corporate career and becomes the yoga instructor. And
Yeah.
sure, it's cliche, but you know what? It's real. It's real because she had this awakening, and whatever she was doing in her corporate world was not fulfilling, was not making her happy, and going out and pursuing something different, whether it be her. Lots of people start their own businesses during this period of time. There's so much shifting that yeah, it's so you're right. I think whether you admit it or not, most of us are late bloomers in some way or another, because you really just can't keep all the balls in the air at 100%, all the time.
Right. If you're taking care of business and doing all that, I think very often, you're not taking care of yourself,
Right.
either physically or spiritually
Right.
or something, we can't be all things all the time.
Nope, we
There's a
can't.
time for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the way you
Amazing.
said there's a time for everything, because I was just thinking there are seasons, right?
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
seasons that we go through.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break here so I can tell you about an awesome resource that I think you're going to love. Here's the thing. We are always works in progress. Do you find yourself wondering, what do I want to be when I grow up? If so, then I think you're going to want to subscribe to We're All Getting Older, which is a weekly newsletter written by Lou Blazer. It's all about continuing to grow and get better in the second half of our lives. We're All Getting Older is a sponsor for this podcast, and I'll tell you, I get so much benefit from reading Lou's newsletter every week, and I think you will too. She writes the newsletter for midlifers who believe in getting better as we get older and making the most of life's second half. So if you want to subscribe to that, it is on Substack, and you can easily find a link to subscribe at loublazer.com. That's loublaser.com. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. So you're 52, but this point in life is what has captured your attention and your passion. I can clearly see that.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what led you to start the podcast and why you decided to stay with this idea of
Yeah.
the 40 drinks. What was it about your life that changed? We didn't even get to
We
that.
didn't even get to that. So
Yeah.
many things. One of the things that I knew at the end of the year that was a very obvious marker, not only to me, but even outwardly, that I had changed was that I did meet the man that I ultimately would end up marrying. And he's fabulous. And
Yay.
I knew after dating him a little while that had he met me a couple of years earlier, he would have been probably amused by me for a few months. And then I just would have been too much, too crazy, too wild, too, still out doing everything all the time. I was not a grounded person. Um, and, and so to have evolved into the person that not only was I good for him, but he was good for me. I also probably would have not, after a few months have been like, okay, you're cute and all, but you can't keep up with me, out in the world, or, at the parties and at the drinking and the this and the that. So, so that was a very big marker to me that my life had changed. Like I said, there was some shifting in a friend group that was falling away. um, I had started my business when I was 36. So, that had been a couple of years, and you're just getting to that, what is it? 90% of businesses fail before 5 years, right? And so that at 40, that's 4 years. And so there was just a lot going on in my life that, when I got to the end and picked my head up, it was like, oh, wait, a few things have settled, and different things have fallen into place. So, and that was very much, those came because of the conversations that I had during the 40 Drinks project.
Can you
Um,
point to a couple of those conversations that were
yes,
pivotal for you?
yes. So if we go back to the concept of the party and only meeting with people for, 5 minutes, the difference with this 40 Drinks project was that I got to sit with whoever it was I was having the drink with for I had them all to myself
Mhm.
for this evening, this visit. So 40 drinks became 40 visits, became 40 conversations. And the it started off almost by accident with my best friend. And then a handful of drinks just sort of happened. It was the summer and I was out and people were around and you're seeing people, and some people were home for the weekend or something. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute, I've done 15 of them or 18 of them. It's like, wait, I actually don't have that many left. What, how do I want to spend these? And so I actually went looking for people from throughout my life. So I reached out to people from grammar school, high school, college, different jobs, an old boyfriend, some old girlfriends. And so those really, the second half of the project started to become a little bit more profound, because now
Mhm.
I'm reconnecting with people who I haven't connected with in a long time. And when you're just sitting and having a drink and a visit, conversation naturally turns to when we were friends together, aligned in each other's lives. And a couple of stories came to me that were pretty profound and a little bit life shattering. And here's one. There was a guy I went to college with that I hadn't seen in 15 years, and this was the one I traveled the furthest to as well. I happened to be down in Florida with a client, and he was living there at the time. So we set up a time to connect. And while I was in college, there was this group of guys that I hung out with, really very cool, fabulous, good looking, awesome, fun dudes. And for about a decade, I was just always part of the gang. And even if it was nights where no girls allowed, no girlfriends allowed, whatever the case was, I was always invited to be along. And so I had internalized this characteristic that I was just one of the guys, right? And that's
Mhm.
why they always kept me around no matter what the situation. Um, and I remember actually it was maybe my friend's 21st or 25th birthday. We went up to his parents' condo in Maine, and his dad walked in the next day to take us all out to breakfast. And there in this condo was, 12 guys sprawled around the room, sleeping on floors and couches, and me. Right. And this just was always what it was. So I'm having this drink with this friend of mine, and we're talking and having a grand old time catching up. And at some point during the night, I said something to the effect of, well, that's just what happens when you're one of the guys. And it was almost as if the needle scratched on the record. Like, he sort of stopped all movement and looked at me, and he said, Stephanie, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I was just one of the guys. And he said, Steph, you were never one of the guys. And I back up. Okay, but I don't understand then, all these times and no girls, no girlfriends, no nothing, but I was always invited. And he said, you were just a really cool chick and we loved hanging out with you. So my brain splattered all over wherever we were sitting, because I had taken this such to heart that I was one of the guys.
Mm.
And I had built a sort of a persona, a world around that. In fact, after that group of friends, dissipated and people started growing up and going off their separate ways, I moved back to New Hampshire, and I insinuated myself with another group of guys, thinking I'm just one of the guys. So thinking about this conversation, it's like, well, okay, if I had built this whole structure of personality on top of this characteristic, but the foundation wasn't true, what does that mean for anything I had built on top of it?
Mm.
And then, even beyond that, why was it so important to me to be one of the guys? And what I came up with was, it's not that it was important to me to be one of the guys, it's that I never would have given myself the credit to be cool enough, hip enough, awesome enough on my own to be included at the level that I was included all this time with this group of friends. I had to handicap myself. I had to caveat myself
Mm.
in order to give myself a reason why they would have me around.
Mm. What do you think that looked like in practice in your life? That assumption about yourself. How did it play out?
I think it was a lack of not self-confidence, because if you talk to anybody who knew me in my 20s and my 30s, I was one of the most confident, adventurers out there. Self-esteem, maybe. I didn't have the belief in myself that I was as awesome as they were, that
Mm.
I was as cool as they were, and yet I, kept up with them, every step of the way for a decade.
Incredible, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
it was a very internal thing. And for me,
Mm.
one of the places where I have been an absolute late bloomer is knowing myself in a deeper way and understanding myself and being introspective. And so I think that it wasn't anything I knew. It wasn't like I was one of those girls who was walking around, hunched over, caved in, don't want to be seen, right? You wouldn't look at me and say, she's got no self-esteem. As a matter of fact, you might have looked at me and said, she's got a little too much. But yeah, I think there were rooms inside my heart and rooms inside of me that had been walled off and locked up and boarded over. And around this time, as I'm having some of these conversations with people who knew me at different points in my life, they were they were, scratching on the wallpaper to see like, oh, there's a door behind there. What happens if we unlock that door and open that door? And so
Mm.
it was a lot of internal stuff happening, shifting who I thought I was, who I saw myself as, how other people saw me, and how they reflected back to me these wonderful things that I might not have given myself credit for.
It's amazing. Okay, so I have another question for
Mhm.
you. Why groups of guys?
I don't know. I always thought that I got along better with men than with women. I always thought that. I mean, through high school, through college, through my 20s, through my 30s, like I would um girls would come and go through my life, anywhere from a year to 5 years. I was never great at having long-lasting relationships with women. And actually, it's really interesting. There's a woman who I was hanging around with a lot. I was probably in my maybe late 20s, and we hung around again for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then she just kind of pulled away. We kind of broke up, um and we didn't see each other for years, and it was a
Mm.
little heartbreaking, as it
It
always
is
is.
hard. Yeah.
So during this 40 Drinks project, I thought, this is a great excuse to reach out and reconnect with people that I would like to reconnect with. And she was one of them. And at the time, she actually turned me down. She said, I'm not comfortable. I don't want to have a drink with you. And let me also caveat that
That's really hard.
it was hard,
Yeah.
but and there were two women who said no. But the thing I have to remind is that when I did this, at my day job, I own a marketing agency. So we put up a website, and I was writing blog posts and then sharing them out on social. And so it was not just you and I sitting down to have a drink and reconnect. It was part of a bigger thing where there was going to be some sort of public facing piece of
I
this.
see. Yeah. So I can see why somebody would not,
Yeah. Somebody
anybody
might
who's
say,
private would be
yeah,
like, yeah, I'm not going to
yeah.
be part of that. Yeah.
Naturally, a couple of years later, we came back together, and we have rekindled our friendship, and we, are in communication. But last year, she and I were talking, and I was saying, you know, do you remember why? Because of course it's been 20 years now. Do you remember why we broke up, why we stopped seeing each other? And she said, yeah. She said, I wanted more from you, and I didn't know how. I didn't even know what more meant. If you had asked me what more meant when I was 25 or 6 or 7 or 8, I would have said, "Oh, more parties, more going out, more excitement, more travel." And she was looking for the exact opposite. She was looking for depth. She was looking for vulnerability. She was
Mm.
looking for, to get to know deeper levels of me, and for me to get to know deeper levels of her. And I had no idea how to do that. I frankly was not capable of it. And so I think that was probably my challenge with women through the years, is that I wasn't able to go deeper, to be vulnerable, to open up. Um, and maybe with my guy friends, it wasn't necessary. So maybe
Hmm.
that was the fit. Maybe that
That
was
could
the
be
why
it. That
why
could
men.
very well be it, right? Because
Yeah.
guys kind of tend to be okay with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's funny. I can relate very much to a lot of what that thing of hanging out with guys. I also love to hang out with guys in my younger years, and now I frankly avoided groups of women
Mm.
because of a group that I hung out with, my freshman year of high school, and I felt like there was a lot of mean girl stuff happening in a group.
Yep.
And that's when I made a decision for myself that if I was going to be friends with other girls or women, that it was going to be one-on-one, that I
Hmm.
wasn't going to do the group girl thing or the
Yeah.
group female thing. And
Yeah.
that has changed since I've started my podcast, actually, which is kind of
That's
fun and
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
I have a really cool quote that I want to read to you, which I think really applies to this image you had of yourself. And then I'd love that It made me laugh when you said your brain splattered out. It's the thing because it was so graphic and I get it. But here's the thing that it's a quote by somebody named John Green. You don't remember what happened. You what you remember becomes what happened.
Yes. Yes.
Isn't that crazy?
Absolutely.
Our
Yes.
memories are so faulty. It's crazy.
Yes, because they make
And
up stories to
yeah,
explain things.
yeah. We're meaning making machines.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And sometimes we make the wrong meaning,
right.
which
Yeah,
I certainly did in several ways,
yeah,
around my life,
yeah.
in many aspects, and maybe almost all aspects, through my 20s and 30s. Yeah. Um, yeah, I made a lot of the wrong meanings
What have you
interpreted.
learned? What have you learned about yourself? Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
I just wanted to know what you've learned about yourself since you started the podcast.
Oh my goodness. Um, I have learned that I'm not done. I have a lot more to learn about myself and a lot more to uncover and address and heal. The podcast has been very interesting. So let me talk a little bit about how it came to be, which will answer one of your other questions, and then it'll circle back to this. So for a number of years after the project ended, I thought I would write a book about it. And so I worked on a book. I had a friend helping me. We took it out to agents and publishers. I even had an agent for a year and a half. And just it was always gatekeepers and challenges and this is a great idea, but not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fine. And then a handful of years ago, I did a seminar that showed me a little bit of the underneath side of podcasting, the mechanics and how to do it. And I thought, oh, well, I could do that. I think that's manageable. And at first I thought, well, let me talk about my 40 Drinks project, but in 40 episodes, you're pretty much done. So I thought, well, what if I took the spotlight off of me and I turned it outward and talked to other people about their transition
Mm-hmm.
and how they fared through this same period of time that I did. And so I have had 100 conversations with people about this transition around age 40. And one of the most amazing things is that my goal is to just showcase so many versions of the transition that anybody who's in it or facing it or going through something will find a way to, will find an episode that they can resonate with, that they know they're not alone, right?
Yeah.
And yet every, I don't know, third, fifth episode, I will, finish recording the conversation and I will go, ooh, that one was for me. Some of the lessons, some of the things that other people, I have not been a particularly introspective person throughout my life. And so having these conversations with other people is so good for me because I can use it as a mirror and see what they're seeing and see what they went through. And then I can take it back and say, how do I relate to that? How do I feel about that? Is there anything in my life that was like that? And so the podcast really has me continuing to work through, some of my own, personal stuff, personal growth kind of stuff. But
Absolutely. I find the same thing. It's
yeah,
it's an incredible journey, isn't it?
and that's the interesting thing, right? Is that at this period that I'm focused on, this 35 to 45, this age 40 transition, it really is just the hallway to the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
Because your 50s, there's another transition, and anecdotally I've heard your 60s, there's another transition, right? So you're not done by any stretch of the imagination. You just continue. And for me, I find that I'm going along and things are great for a while, and everything's cruising and work is great and relationships are great, And then all of a sudden there's like a hitch in your giddy up. And it's like, oh, wait. And there's just another thing that bubbles up that's like, oh, okay, let me spend a little time working on this. And then once I work through that, back to grooving, back to cruising. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. How cool. How very cool. I love that. I, I will say that starting a podcast changed my life.
Mm,
It is, it's like these conversations um, are so precious to me to
yeah.
be able to sit across a computer screen from you and feel like I'm sitting across a table
Yeah.
from you having a drink,
Right.
and
Yeah.
talking about big stuff, that you
Yes.
don't get to talk to about it with most people because you'd be the weird lady at the party or whatever.
Yes. That is my favorite part too. I get on a conversation with somebody and it's not, hey, how's the weather? What are you up to? What are the kids doing? It's like straight into the heart of it. Like, let's talk about the gooey stuff. Let's get into it. And it's so
Yes.
much fun.
Very cool. How can people find you and your podcast? And what else are you excited about that's coming up soon? Anything?
Yeah. Um, so people can find me at 40drinks.com and spell out the word 40. And I am on all the socials as 40 drinks. So again, spell out the word 40. Um, I am excited that in the next few weeks, I will publish my 100th episode of my podcast.
That is such a big
Um,
deal. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I just had my 2-year anniversary and I love it. I love doing it. I love having these conversations because I really do. My goal is to make it common cultural knowledge that there is this transition around age 40 and then showcase so many versions of that people know that they're not alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, come check it out at 40 Drinks and I'd love to connect.
Perfect. And if you're driving right now or doing something and you're not in front of a place where you can go find her, I will have all that stuff for you in the show notes. So, Stephanie, thank you so much for being here with me today. This was just such a great conversation. I
Oh, it's
appreciate
my
it.
honor. Yvonne, thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it. I love how this kind of a wingnut idea that Stephanie had for this 40 Drinks project has had such staying power for leading her into this path of self-discovery. How cool is that? Oh my goodness. I have to say, I look back and I think, yeah, I did a project that kind of got things moving for me and helped me get unstuck. And that was my photo a day project that I started in 2016. And I thought it was going to be a year. That was my challenge to myself, was a photo a day using the camera phone in my pocket. I wanted to take an interesting photo every day for a year. And I ended up doing 2 years of that, which fascinates me now because I don't know if I could do it now. But you know what? Yes, I could. If I decided I wanted to, I totally could. And I recommend it. Think about some project for yourself, something you want to do that intrigues you, and step into it and see where it takes you. Because boy, I'm saying, you just never know. You just never know. So if you want more information about Stephanie and the 40 Drinks project, I will have all that information for you in the show notes. You can just go to latebloomerliving.com/podcast and look for episode 188. And hey, if you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with a friend, or head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave me a review if you would, and that helps other people find the podcast. I would greatly appreciate it. I'm so thankful that you are listening and that you've spent this time with me here today. I hope you have a great week. Stay safe and well. Talk soon.